All right, welcome back to the Newstalgia podcast. This is my episode talking about Epyx. Wesley's here with me today.
What's up?
So this is our second episode. So now we're kind of starting to hit our rhythm. We kind of know what we're doing now, at least a little bit. We cut our process down from 3 months to 1 month this time.
Ooh.
It's a big deal. Maybe 2 months, but we've had these ideas for so long that it's hard to like just power through them and do them really quick because we've been so thorough that sometimes you just have to make do with understanding that you're just not gonna find everything you want to find.
Yeah, it gets to a point where you gotta say, it's too much research. Gotta kind of you get what you get, and just
especially
run
when
with
we're
it.
talking about getting to the point where it's already like a 10-minute video. People aren't going to benefit from that little bit more information that would take possibly weeks to find. But I will say that this one was a lot easier than the Sesame Street store episode, which if you haven't seen that episode, go back and watch the episode. And we also did a podcast on it, so you can listen to that as well. And we talked a little bit about our difficulties finding stuff, and a lot of that had to do with the time. It was the 90s, and it was a store. I didn't have that problem with Epyx, and Epyx has been around for way longer.
I was about to say, you were able to find all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
no problem.
exactly. And I think that has to do with part of the industry that it was in.
Yeah.
Technology.
They were all over that shit. They made sure to put it in every consumer digest, whatever.
It was all over the place. But at the same time, when a company has been completely gone for 25 years, because they officially closed the doors in 93, it's interesting how much people can just drop off the face of the earth. And the same thing we have with Gene Platten. Epyx was started by two guys. If you've watched the video, I talked about them a lot. It's Connolly and Freeman. And Connolly, who was really the guy who really started everything, he's the one who designed the games originally. Dude's gone.
Is he died?
Who knows? I just couldn't find him, and I've been wanting to talk to you about this because I mentioned that I couldn't really find anything, but I couldn't find an obituary. I couldn't find anything. Couldn't find any websites that he may have had. So if you watch the video, you know that he basically kind of didn't get forced out of his own company, but they brought in another guy to run the company with him. So he was like co-CEO, co-president with another guy, who was the guy from who was with Coleco Industries, who created the ColecoVision console.
Mm-hmm.
They brought in the guy from Coleco Industries, and Connolly left. He made a few games and that Epyx published, and that's it. Don't know what happened to him after that. I never could find him. I found one picture of the guy, and judging by the picture, I've got it right here on a folder. This is the only picture I have of Jim Connolly, and he just looks just fantastically 70s with the the big glasses and the mustache. I don't know. We don't know what happened to him, and he started the company. It's just crazy.
He might have just shaved his face, and now no one knows what he looks like.
Yeah, that's true. He just disappeared. He got contacts and shaved his mustache, and now he's a totally new man. But at the same time, he was probably already, I don't know how old he was, late 30s, early 40s, I would assume. I
feel like everybody looks older back in the day.
Yeah, that's true.
You see people back in the day, and you're like, oh, he's got to be like 40, and then you look, and it's like 25.
Yeah.
But I think that's also because movies back then used like old people for like high school, because I got in high school and I was like, why doesn't everyone look like John Travolta in Grease?
But at the same time, he shouldn't be that old, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
he must have done something for the rest of his life. Like, he wasn't making games that I could find.
That's just so weird that you would go from being like making games to just guess I'm not making games anymore. Like, the industry was still going, but like, I mean, what happens if you are part of like a failed venture in that industry, especially at that time? Like, are people that hyped to have you on board another company's
So the way from what I discovered from doing this research, and we'll get to this a little bit more later, and also just in any kind of entertainment industry in general, it seems that you usually fail up.
Yeah. A lot of companies like that, because you hear a lot about, I don't know, CEOs get like more chances than anybody. Like, you run one company into the ground and they give you another one. Like that Fire Festival dude in the documentary that everyone's been watching.
Yeah.
He already had like a failed business, and people were still like, oh yeah, I want to get in on this fire thing. Like, yeah, this guy's a genius. And it's like, he already had a failed company. What were you thinking was gonna happen?
And see, that's the weird thing is, so Jim, we're talking about Jim Conway still. So Epyx started as automated solutions. They were really successful. And then they kind of hit some difficulty, because like the industry kept growing and they kind of stayed stagnant. And then they brought the company back up with some help from some other people, and then he left. So when he left, Epyx was like at the top of their game. Like that was like right around the time where they started releasing summer games. And so that's when they started releasing their biggest hits. So you would think other people in the industry would see that and like, okay, well he built this, like they're big now. As far as I can tell, he stopped. He left the game industry. I don't know. And then there's John Freeman, who I have slightly more information about. But all I know is that one, he either started a game company with his wife, or he joined a really awesome '80s synth band.
This is the greatest picture ever.
We'll put the pictures on the screen for the podcast, so just so you can see that we're talking about. But he married Ann Westfall. If you know anything about '80s video games and video game design, she was a pretty popular game designer at the time, and they created their own company. I really couldn't find much about them either. They kind of fizzled away in the '90s.
I just want to know more about this guy with the fingerless glove.
Yeah, so like I said, we'll have a picture up on the screen, and the guy in the top right, he's wearing a leather-studded fingerless gloves. And remember, these are all like game developers and designers.
If you showed this picture to somebody, that would not be their first guess. If you show this to them, you're like, what's their occupation?
Yeah, they look like a Tears for Fears cover band or something. I don't know.
One guy in the kind of in the center just has these like eyes bulging, like he looks serious.
Oh, I didn't even notice him before.
I didn't until we put it on the big screen. And the guy in the top left almost looks like Oscar Isaac or something with like a bowl cut.
They're very picturesque, and they've got like the black shirts, and
they got the pose down and everything.
They look cool as fuck, dude. Like they were like the rock stars back then.
They definitely like planned this photo shoot out. They're like, oh, you definitely wear the glove, dude. We're all gonna get matching freaking turtlenecks, and
it's the '80s. So all right, well, it kind of got sidetracked right from the very beginning, but it's just fun to look at these people and just how they disappear. It's like, I hope that if I ever just colossally fail, that I can just disappear, because these people surely did it.
It was easier back then with no internet.
This is true. And once again, we run into this problem that we're in the pre-internet age. I mean, granted, there was internet, but it's not nearly the thing it is now. Not everybody had internet. So
yeah, well, there's no social media, I should say.
Especially social media. Yeah, you can never disappear with social media.
Yeah.
So anyways, we talked about the difficulty. One thing I did not have difficulty with was finding gameplay for all their games, which is really exciting, because pretty much any game that they created that I needed video for, I could find. There's a surprising amount of people who still have working Commodore 64s.
Shout out to people who put gameplay for like the oldest games ever up on YouTube. Like, I didn't see the actual videos, I don't think. I just saw after you downloaded them. But did they have a lot of views? Like, were people watching these?
Some had like, a little over 10,000, 20,000. But it's a nostalgia thing for people who were around back then. Who were not around. Okay, that sounded bad. But people who were playing the games back then. Because, like I said, a lot of people to still have a working Commodore 64, you had to have been like very aware of like making sure that you kept it in good shape to play it. And granted, I know a lot of these games are released on SNES and some of the other consoles of the time that are probably easier to keep around. Like, I played the California Games series. I played California Games 2 when I was a kid on my mom's Super Nintendo. So that's the only way I had heard of this company, is I used to play the California Games 2. So it's one of those things where they weren't so niche, like they didn't just stay to one console. That would have made it hard to find. So the fact that they were thankfully on Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, then the Nintendo Entertainment System, Commodore 64, Amiga, all those, it's not hard to find. But it was great, because now I pretty much had all the gameplay I needed. And also, my biggest conclusion from all this research I did is video game commercials have gotten way worse since then.
Wait, you think they were better back then?
Well, maybe not better, just more insane.
They all look like art house films. Like, it's the craziest thing. Like you were saying when we were watching them, like it's like some David Lynch shit. It's like
so weird.
And it's like you said one of them was like 30 seconds. I was like, there's no way. I felt like that lasted forever.
That was the Amiga. The Amiga computer.
It's like all black and white, and it's like super serious. I don't know.
It's like
so
wild. It's like this crazy sci-fi set. It is bizarre.
Even the one with the guy with his head blowing up, you're like, this doesn't make me want to buy this.
A joystick.
This is my head gonna explode if I buy this shit? Like, what just happened? That's terrifying. They don't even make. Well, I guess they make commercials for consoles now, but it's more like, look at all the games you can play on this. It's not like, here's somebody playing with a joystick and looking real cool.
Well, I think the one you're talking about was the Amiga commercial, and I'll see if I think it's this one right here. And that's the one where he freaking turns into the space baby from 2001: A Space Odyssey after he uses the computer.
I forgot about that one.
It's such a weird thing.
Frightening.
Like, why would you want to turn into the giant mega space baby? Yeah, that's the one. It's an Amiga commercial for the Commodore Amiga computer, and the guy uses the computer and he freaking turns into the big space baby from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like,
it's this old man too, and the light just like completely envelops him, and it's just floating space baby.
Yeah, so I don't know if the space baby will make the final cut of the video, but
when did it definitely should. That's frightening. But when did video games start getting advertised as fun? Because like this is not really like seeing this old man turn into the space baby. I wouldn't think that would be like appealing to kids who want to.
So I'll pull up the ColecoVision commercial, and the ColecoVision console kind of came out at a time where it was still like where arcades were still like the big thing, and they're saying they could replicate the arcade experience. And I think that's more along the lines of what you would expect today from a video game commercial. Like you're gonna feel like you're experiencing this at home. And now today, I think it's more like you get to experience World War II from your computer chair. But yeah, I think that's always just been a thing because Ridley Scott did a commercial for Apple in the 80s, and it's real weird. It's real art house, like classic Ridley Scott kind of stuff.
That's not the one where they throw the is it a hammer at the screen? That's Ridley Scott?
I believe that's a Ridley Scott commercial. I hope I don't have my information wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's a Ridley Scott commercial.
I don't remember the name of that commercial. There's like a name for it, and I don't know.
I'm fairly certain it's Ridley Scott.
It's like everyone's the same, and then he's like the one guy like throws a hammer or whatever it is at the screen. Yeah, that's like a classic commercial.
And I just think that that was a time when maybe. So video games have gone through like phases where people think, oh, video games are for kids, and then they'll go through a phase where like kids stop playing video games and it's more just for adults. So we can talk a little bit about the history of just video game in general. So Epyx was born as Automated Solutions, like I said before, and they were D&D nerds. Like Jim Conley and John Freeman were Dungeons and Dragons boys.
What a surprise!
And they made games that were basically like, modeled after that idea of kind of building your own story with the way you play. And granted, the technology was much more primitive back then, so they couldn't do the kind of stuff we can do today. But they were making games for like adults. Like there weren't like, I mean, you go on Xbox or PlayStation and play Fortnite, you're playing against like 7-year-old kids these days. You didn't have 7-year-old kids going on to their Commodore PETs or their the TR-80s and stuff like that and typing in all the code they needed to do to play these games. So it was for adults.
How well did stuff like that do? Because you got to think that was probably like a niche. What year was that?
So their first game came out in 78. End of 78, beginning of 79.
You got to think that's like a niche market for like adults, because I feel like a lot of adults would kind of turn up their nose at that time, because now adults or people who are technically adults are like, yeah, I'll buy a new console right now. I'll play the Nintendo Switch like at home by myself. Like, it's not weird for an adult to like go home and play video games, but back then I feel like that's kind of a hard sell if you're trying to get adults in 1978 to buy themselves a video game.
It was
feel like that would be
it was
considered kid stuff to them, but I guess it wasn't considered anything because it was kind of brand new.
Well, you also have to think that a computer back then was like $3,000 in today's money. So
they weren't letting kids get on it.
No, I mean, most people, it was mostly adults. So, for example, like I said, their first game came out in '78. They released Temple of Apshai, which was really like Dungeons and Dragons like kind of thing. Like that's who was playing this game.
Cones of Dunshire.
It sold over 20,000 copies.
Damn.
And this is in time. So I think the statistic I found was in 1984, 8% of people had a computer. 8% of people had a computer in their home, I should say. But we're talking 5 years before that to have 20,000 copies sell. I'm trying to think of like maybe
that's wild.
Like the only way you could get that kind of like attachment rate, like so that's basically like most people who have a computer bought it, who were playing like games on a computer bought it. Like the only thing I can think of, like, it's like Wii Sports with the Wii. Like you have to sell the game with the console to get that many people that own the console to buy it. It's just but you gotta think there was not nearly as many games being made back then.
That's true. It was slim pickings. So
it was very different. And to find something like when they released their game Starfleet Orion, which was more or less almost like Battleship in a way. Like it was more esoteric gameplay wise. Like you weren't manually controlling a ship and like telling it to move and shooting at things. You were controlling like it was like guessing number grids, like where a ship was. I couldn't find any gameplay of it because it's
boring Galaga.
But at the same time, not only was it not as straightforward in the gameplay as what we know today, you also had to do a ton of work just to get to the point where you could play it, because they came on cassettes. Games came on cassettes back then for the early Commodore computers and the other companies like the Tandy computers. They actually come on cassettes, and they couldn't fit all the information for the game on there, so you'd have to put in the cassette and then follow instructions in a manual to type in certain things to get the game to run. So imagine if you had
you had to really want to play this.
Imagine if you want to play like the newest Call of Duty, and you got like your son, like your 6-year-old son, want to play the newest Call of Duty game, but he had to put the game in his PlayStation and then like code the movement system for his characters before he could play it. Like it was
shit. I feel like the golden age of consoles at home was like when I was a kid. Like I sound like an old man now because I just got a PS4. Sorry, this is kind of like sidetracking, but I just got one recently, and I'm like, why do I have to set up an account? Why do I have to type in this? Why do I have to download some shit? I have a disc. Why can't I just put it in and play the game? Like I like GameCube where you just like put a disc in, it's ready to play. You don't have to like update and do all this.
We're getting there. We're getting there. We're getting there in the history of Epyx. And I'm just telling you where they came from. So this is how difficult it used to be to game back in the day. It was
I wouldn't do it.
Nothing was as straightforward. So you jump ahead a few years after the kind of I won't say like the collapse of automated solutions, but it was at the point where they kind of started transition from being automated solutions into Epyx, and they started making their fun like action games. The early 80s was when everybody and their mother was making a console. So Atari, this is before Nintendo had even like really started to make their consoles, but like there were a bunch of like small consoles coming out. You had ColecoVision, and at that time there were so many consoles because that was the easier way to play at the time. So computers had had started, or the place where gaming really started. It was arcades and computers. Those were the two.
Yeah, I was about to say that at this point, people releasing consoles, weren't they like competing with arcades as well?
And that's when.
Because I gotta think, for parents, like I'd rather give my kids some quarters, tell them to go down to the arcade, than buy like how much is a console back then.
It just depends on which one you're talking about.
Yeah,
they were a lot. I mean, it was expensive.
I'd much rather just send my kid down with like a couple of dollars to play video games. That was the point.
I mean, if you look at the ColecoVision commercial, they were kind of selling it as the home arcade experience. So, like I said, we went from a period of having, you could either go to the arcade and play, or you could play on a PC. And then the idea of consoles started to really pick up steam, and everybody was releasing a console. So many people released a console, that's how we had the video game collapse of 1983.
Oh, yeah.
Which is crazy. If you don't know anything about that, definitely look into it. We've talked about maybe doing an episode on that in the future, but I don't know if that really fits our purview.
It fits one of my big interests, E.T.
Yes, and that was really... so everybody knows that Atari was like the king of consoles back then. But like I said, so many people were releasing consoles, they diluted the market. And there's the basis of supply and demand is you don't put so much on the market that you reduce the demand for everybody, and that's what happens eventually. Even if there's one big one that's like better than everything else, if there's so many other options on the market, the whole market gets diluted, nobody wins, and that's what happened. Consoles crashed, and that not long after that, the Commodore 64 came around, or really started to pick up steam, and back on top was PC gaming.
When's the last time somebody made like a new console? Like not like here's the like PS4, here's the Xbox One, but like a new company is in the game and
people have tried.
They have a console.
People have tried.
What's like the most recent one?
Oh God, there was what was it? Ouya that tried. That just was a huge failure.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
Some people definitely remember that.
What was their deal? Like, what was different about it?
I think, God, now you're making me question my own memory.
Put you on the spot.
No, I don't remember specifically. I just know that they got a ton of money on Kickstarter, I believe. And they had all these promises, and then people got shipped, and it was basically just those. It was not much more than one of those shitty things you get at the dollar store that has like games built into it,
like a plug-in and play.
Yes,
thing.
It was not much different than that.
I used to go in on some of those plug-in and play games.
I did too.
That was fun.
I had a Spider-Man when I was a kid, and it was pretty dope.
I had that one too. I totally forgot about that. I also had one where you could like make like your own characters. I guess you like make up faces. Yeah. I don't know. Those are fun. I had a SpongeBob one too.
I was just about to say was his
joystick
nose.
Was his nose. Yeah.
I think Cameron had that. He was really into SpongeBob.
And those came out like kind of later. Those were like
that was 2000s for the most part. A lot of them.
I would still play those. That's actually kind of genius.
Still make them, trust me,
because they're cheap.
Well, really the Super Nintendo Classic and the Nintendo Classic, those little consoles, they're the same. That's what they are.
Yeah.
Basically plug and plays.
Yeah.
And those are different. Like they're expensive and maybe not always the best quality, but
I think I remember hearing about that console on Kickstarter and stuff though.
Yeah, it was a big deal. It raised a lot of money, and it was just a flop. And I'm trying to think of some other companies that have done it. There's been so many that have tried over the years.
I guess I never thought about it that there really isn't anybody other than Xbox and PlayStation
and Nintendo. That's the big three.
And then like PCs, but like that's not really.
That doesn't. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like that's a whole separate. That's a market unto itself. Yeah, it's kind of gotten to the point where they haven't cornered the market, but there's just no point in trying for a lot of companies. But I say that, guess who's releasing a console later this year? Atari.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. When's the last time they've released one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. They've hung around for so long and just limped along for decades.
What is this new one? Is it like an actual brand new thing, or is it like how?
No, it's a brand new thing. Like they're going. It's more of like a streaming box for games than it is like like a PlayStation or an Xbox. It's gonna be different. Hint, hint. Might be talking about that more in a future episode. We're doing an episode on Atari. We'll get there later. Speaking of Atari, that brings me to like I thought was the most interesting point of this whole thing. Epyx was huge. They made huge games for a long time, but when the Nintendo Entertainment System came out, and that kind of started killing the computer gaming market, because like I said, we went from a period where the PC gaming was the premier home gaming market, and then it was consoles, and then it was PC again. When the Nintendo Entertainment System came out, it put consoles back on top for playing at home, and that was when the Commodore 64 had been kind of the premier PC, and that was where Epyx really like made their name, was making games for the Commodore 64, and they stuck with it after the Nintendo Entertainment. I want to call it the NES. After the NES came out, and that was their downfall, was trying to hang on to a dying market. Like and I think that's something you see all throughout history of many companies, like even before like not even speaking of just technology, just any business, is when you try to hang on to something that is clearly dying, and you just ride it all the way down into your demise. And that's what they did. And I won't say that was just like the beginning. Like that built their coffin. They didn't jump into that coffin until a little bit later. And like I said, we're talking about Atari. Atari are the ones who hammered the nails into the lid of the coffin and put Epyx away for good. And the most interesting person that I read about through all this was a guy named Jack Tramiel.
I was about
and
to
we
say,
talked about him. He freaking looks like a Bond villain. And if you read a lot of stuff about him, apparently he kind of was like a Bond villain of the video game industry. Like, he was a hardcore businessman. Like, he was a shark.
Is he the one you said was in the Holocaust?
I believe he was he was a Holocaust survivor. He was Polish. I hope I'm not getting that wrong. It's been a little bit since I've did all my research, but he was a Holocaust survivor, and he went on to become a really successful businessman. And I'm not gonna try to tarnish his reputation. I'm just saying that he was a ruthless businessman, and he did what he had to do to succeed in his businesses. And he probably is the reason that Atari's still around at all. To be honest, Atari has failed like 6 different times, and
there was some crazy shit he did that you told me about, and I don't remember what it was.
So, I talked about it in the video. The guy who built the Amiga system for Commodore had originally offered it to Atari, and when Atari, when Atari really fell apart during the video game collapse in '83. He went with the Commodore instead of Atari. So Atari was originally going to get that computer, and that was going to be a big boom for them, was to have a good home computer system.
That's right.
Gave it to Commodore instead, or sold it to Commodore instead, and it ended up being like one of Commodore's like biggest successes was the Amiga computer. So that kind of was really knocked down Atari from even having a chance of getting out of that collapse. So Jack Tramiel had just bought Atari after their stocks collapsed. So he bought them when they were down. And later when it came back around, the guy who ran Amiga needed help building the Handy. So you and I talked a lot about the Handy.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with Handies.
Yeah. So Epyx wanted to build their handheld system. They needed somebody to give them the money. And Atari was there waiting, and it was Jack Tramiel. So, and I guess he probably didn't forget that the guy's name was David Morse, who had built the Amiga, and he was now running Epyx. I guess he hadn't forgotten what they had done, and he was pretty quick to give them the money to take it over. And that's how we got the Atari Lynx, and also that super rad commercial featuring Tobey Maguire.
That's the greatest commercial.
So a funny story about that. We should tell the story because it's kind of hilarious. Another thing that kind of put Epyx back on my radar when we started talking about this series is we had an idea for an episode before we even like did any other episodes.
I don't want to reveal what this one's about, just in case.
I won't. But we were looking for. We just happened to be looking into Tobey Maguire's like earliest acting credits, and we were like looking at anything we could find. And we found this old commercial of him in a handheld gaming console commercial. It was before our time, and I don't remember the Atari Lynx. I don't remember it ever being around, mostly because it was not nearly as successful as the Game Boy. I had a Game Boy growing up, so I didn't play it.
I had a Game Boy Advance. I didn't even have a Game Boy or a Game Boy Color.
Yeah. I had every Game Boy up until like the DS, I guess.
Oh yeah, I never had a DS. I think the only handheld console I had was Game Boy Advance.
But anyways, we found that commercial of the Atari Lynx, which was in the video, the video for Epyx. It's a really funny commercial. It's so 80s. It's like super radical.
Literally just like having the time of his life playing this video game in the bathroom,
wearing his denim cutoff jacket and everything. So it's
so funny seeing him like portray the cool guy, because all I see is like him trying to be cool in like Spider-Man 3, like even back then as a kid.
I hope we get to talk about more about what led us to finding this video, but we don't want to reveal anything just yet.
Yeah.
So anyways, we came across that video. We thought it was hilarious, so we saved it. And I had the name in my head, Epyx, and so I started really looking into him. I was like, I think I want to do a video about this because I think it's really interesting. And I remember like, oh shit, like we just found that video like a couple months ago about Epyx, and sure enough, it was. Oh
yeah, we didn't even realize it was Epyx until we were looking at stuff we'd saved for this other project.
And then it kind of hit me. I was like, oh god, that's exactly. It was a commercial for the Atari Lynx, and sure enough, at the end of the commercial, you could see Epyx's name at the bottom.
Yeah, we were both kind of like, oh my god, like what are the odds of that? We literally got it for something completely different, and then.
Yep, and I assume that commercial came out before Atari. Cut Epyx out of that deal. So they cut him out of the deal. I mean, it's easy to say that Jack Tramiel held a grudge and he was looking for any opportunity to cut them out of that deal so that they got no money for the links. But at the same time, it probably has more to do with just a mismanaged company.
Yeah.
We don't know. It's like I said, it's just like how the Sesame Street store. We don't really know what caused it to fail. We just know that it failed. This is kind of the same thing. We know that the partnership between Atari and Epyx failed. We don't really know why. It's fun to speculate. Like he was just like, I've cut you out of this deal. Like who knows? But that was pretty much the end. Once they got no money from the Atari links, because that was like their big hope. Like they spent years like limping along, just grabbing money from where they could so that they could make their handheld console. And when they sold it to Atari and they didn't really get any money out of the deal, that killed them for good, pretty much. I mean, they made some more games, but nothing was really selling.
Maybe that's why Tobey Maguire became such a ruthless poker player, because he met Jack Tramiel and learned tactics from him.
You never know. But Jack Tramiel's a really interesting guy, too. I'll definitely be talking about him more at length in a future episode, but he's a really interesting guy. But he's just the most interesting figure of this whole thing. Like, the rest of them are all just game developers, and they were passionate about their games and stuff, but no, he's a shark. He's a business guy. He knew what he was doing. But then they got bought. Weird things always happen with companies after they go out of business. Like if they're a standalone business, when things started getting split up and sold off, they got bought by a company, Bridgestone Media Group, who's a Christian company. And they're still around. And if you look at their website, they make Christian movies, like dozens of them, like
any like notable ones that we've heard of?
No, nothing like God's Not Dead, or is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Nothing like that.
They've made like what, 3 or 4 of those now?
It's like more one of the things if I mean, we live in Georgia, so we live in the Bible Belt. You know the Christian bookstores you see around?
Yeah.
If you went into those, I have a feeling you probably could find some of their movies in those kind of stores.
Some of those movies are gold. I've seen some Mormon movies that are hysterical. Mobsters and Mormons, if you haven't heard of that, look it up.
But this company, I guess their plan was, I don't know what they were doing at the time in like 93, but now they make movies. I guess their plan was that they were going to make some Christian video games, and they wanted the infrastructure that Epyx had to make video games with Christian themes. I don't know how direct the Christian themes would be, like the Bible video game or something, but that was their plan. I don't think they ever did anything with it. And then later, most recently, like I think some of them got released on like the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 and the Wii, and you could play California games on the Wii these days. I think if you still have a Wii that's functioning.
When you said Bible video games, I think there's like a Kickstarter. I remember hearing about this.
The two brothers.
I guess it is. One? Tornado Twins? Is this the one?
Yes, that's it.
I don't remember where I heard about this, but they were like they have a Kickstarter for like, is it just the Old Testament verse? Like,
I don't know.
They wanted to make a Bible video game. I don't know if anything ever happened with that. I definitely remember hearing
about it. They're still working on it as far as I've heard. It's bizarre. Just goes to show people are still making bad video games to this day.
Like this game artist that says, I'm not a Christian or a believer, but since the stories of the Bible influence modern culture, I'm honored to see this major game come to life. Like, I don't care about any of this stuff, but could be a cool game.
Did you had a Wii, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember these being on sale on the Wii? I don't remember it, honestly.
No.
It was 2008, so not in high school.
I honestly didn't really I never got as invested in the Wii as I did with GameCube. Yeah. I feel like the Wii was just one. I don't know. Is this controversial to say? Are there diehard Wii fans out there?
I'm sure there are, but you can say it.
I don't know. I felt like it was one of those things you get it home and everyone's like, yeah, let's play Wii, and the whole family gets involved. But then after that, it kind of loses its appeal. You're like, I don't want to swing my hands around.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those things that was really only...
It's like Guitar Hero or something that, where you're like, oh, yeah, we got it. And then you play it once or twice, and you're like, okay, that's enough.
You only play when people are around to play it with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was the last time you really heard anything from them. I don't know if as far as I can tell, there's no plans to ever release any of their games, and not that anybody is like asking
there's
for
just
it.
like too many other like similar games. Like, I don't know, if you're gonna play like old school games, everyone's gonna play Donkey Kong and Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man and Galaga and whatever,
Mario and all that. I mean, that just goes to show you
they're,
how much
they're even selling like those straight up like arcade, like literal arcade machines at Walmart. Have you seen those?
Yeah, I did see.
You can literally like buy one for your house that just plays
has like a bunch of games on it.
Yeah, or it just has like I don't know. I've seen like a Galaga one. I've seen a Street Fighter one. Maybe like Centipede or Millipede.
But hey, I mean, eventually we'll get back to the old school PC games being popular. If we're back to arcade games coming back around, because now they have all these arcade bars opening up in all kinds of cities.
Yeah. There's a cool one in Asheville. And
we went to one in Chattanooga a few months ago. It's fun.
Yeah.
It is fun to kind of revisit that period of gaming. It was just everything was just so different. It's in every industry, just like everything's cyclical. It always comes back around.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling this kind of thing will resurface in some form or another.
Oh yeah.
But it's just crazy how, if you look at that list that was in the video that talked about the most valuable software companies in the 80s, and how the only one that's there, and here I can pull it up so we're not just making stuff up. Microsoft is on that list, but after Microsoft, none of these companies are really still around. It's just crazy how much that field has changed.
I like some of the names on here.
Yeah.
Digital Research or Micro Focus or software publishing. Like that's...
Yeah, how are you supposed to look up software publishing to see if they're still around? I looked into most of these companies, and if you look at the list, you might be familiar with like Sierra Online. They were making games when I was... They were making games on the PlayStation 1, I'm pretty sure, around that period. Peachtree Software is still around, but most of these companies are gone. Like, they're just gone. They went from being some of the most successful software companies in the world to being gone in like a decade.
Which is so crazy. Like, that doesn't happen that often now. I mean, I guess it took a while for all of them to, like, bite the dust, but...
But, I think that's just how it always goes. Like we said with the Sesame Street store, like, everybody gets in on it.
Everyone gets in on a craze, and only the strong survive.
And only the strong survive, and it turns out Microsoft was the only one that really survived all that.
And they're not even number one on this list.
No, Micropro International, who I couldn't really find much about online, was the most successful company in 1983. But Epyx is number 16. I mean, if you probably look at... I guarantee you, if you looked at the 16th most successful software company in the world now, it'd be a pretty notable company.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt, because there's not that many.
Yeah, and so to go from that to being gone 10 years later, in 1983 to 1993, that's when they shut down. And it's crazy. They're gone, and not a whole lot of legacy left behind. I mean, I guess if you were a big Commodore 64 guy back in the day and you had one and you played these games, there's probably pretty fond memories for you. But they straight up disappeared.
Yeah, I might do an episode about this, but I had a 3DO growing up, and that's another one where you'll mention it to people, because everybody had like a PlayStation, and I didn't really get a PlayStation until like way after the fact, so I don't remember as much playing that, but I remember 3DO games. That was like my childhood, and you try to talk to people about that, and they're like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah, that came around in that same time where a lot of companies were still making consoles before it kind of got shaken up, and it was just really just the main three.
Yeah. It's a shame though, because there's great games on all of these consoles, and it's just kind of sad, but it happens.
I think what the biggest takeaway from this is, companies like Epyx, if they were around today and they were making big games, I think they could have had a longer lifespan, because companies aren't as motivated these days to try to get into the software and the hardware game.
Yeah.
Back then, there was so much more freedom for them to just try whatever they wanted to do, and they, like I said, they wanted to make that handheld console, and they almost got there. But I think these days, companies... Well, now these days they get bought up by companies like EA and Activision, and...
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah, so it's just different. the hardware and software industries are just drastically different. There's like the landscape is so crazy. It's like really, as a lot of things in America and in the world in general, things have just gotten compressed down to just like the few big companies who have the capital just to stay afloat even when things don't go right.
Yeah, it's like that in like any industry, but I feel like.
But back in the early days of any industry, if you look, there were companies that were just popping up left and right and would be successful, flash in the pan, then gone. And now the companies that are still here are the ones who can survive one really bad game.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's different for people who like make the hardware, like people that are making consoles, because like you said, like you can't just come up with a console and compete with these guys. Because I was going to compare it to like, there's like the big movie studios that are like hard to compete with, but you still have like smaller studios making like independent stuff that still does all right or whatever. But the difference there is like they're just making a movie. They're not like, please buy this movie projecting device. Like it's easier to promote something like a movie or like a game just on its own that's on the already established consoles, but trying to sell people on like a brand new device for their home is like, it's too tough. These other companies have too much goodwill. Like people know them, and
the loyalty thing.
Yeah.
And see, there wasn't loyalty like that back then. I think
that was the Wild West.
It was. I think I literally said that in the video, and and I mean, obviously, this one, like I said, this one's much easier to see why they failed. You try to do too much. Sometimes you just gotta stick to making games, and it's easy to say that in hindsight. Like if they just made the right decisions, like if they had decided to like, hey, we should go harder into making games for the Nintendo systems, that could have been a big boon.
Why didn't they do that?
So the CEO at the time, David Morse, literally was quoted as saying that games can be done better on the Commodore 64, even though the Commodore 64 was getting old. People were moving.
I guess he was just, I don't know. He felt strongly about it, I guess.
They did. I mean, hey, you got to give it to them for sticking to their beliefs, but that's what happens.
Sometimes it doesn't pay off, though. It's kind of like sink or swim. You got to adapt or you're done.
Yep, and I think that could be said for every company that's in that list from 1983. Like, they probably made one decision to go in a path that didn't work out, and that's what gets them. But yeah, I think that's just that industry as a whole. The gaming industry was just real crazy back then, and there's so many good stories. And I'm sure we'll delve into more of them, so we won't really dig into it too deep. But yeah, I think that's really all we wanted to talk about for this one. Start wrapping it up a little bit. We'll have another episode coming out real soon.
Yeah, it'll be my turn once again.
Yeah, it'll be a little different too.
Yeah, definitely a little different. I don't want to give it away or anything, but it is toy related.
Yeah.
And it's a toy that was not expensive, and it was in a lot of places. You probably remember it. I don't know. That's bad hints, but it's definitely one that I think a lot of people remember and have fond memories of.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of those things that everybody saw at some point, even if they don't remember it.
Yeah, everybody had like at least a few lying around, or at least saw them in the grocery store. There's a hint for you. But yeah, definitely something different. Very different from Sesame Street General Store. Very different from this for sure.
Yeah.
But that's a fun one.
Like I said last time, if you guys have want to know any more about Epyx and their story over their 15-ish years they were around, if you want to know any more, if you have any more information that we didn't cover that you think is interesting.
Yeah, if anyone has a working Commodore, or you think anyone has a handy?
I don't know. Maybe people. Well, it's the Atari Lynx. I'd love to still see a working Atari Lynx, because I think you had California Games 2 on the Lynx.
Yeah, if anybody has any of these consoles still up and running,
I'd love to see pictures of you running an Epyx game. There's so many games. I'd love to see it. But if you just have any questions or just want to chat, hit us up on our socials.
Yeah, Twitter is @ViewistProd. I always want. It doesn't make sense because Viewist Productions is not Viewist Productions, but it is what it is. I'm not gonna say Viewist Prod.
Yeah, and then we're on Instagram at Viewist Productions. So
yes,
hit us up.
Yeah, and tune in for the next episode, which will be a secret still, but
yeah,
it's a good one.
Yeah,
Definitely tune in. And if you didn't see our last episode, check that out as well if you want to hear more about crazy Sesame Street store that was in the mall.
yep. All right, well, that's about it. We'll see you guys next time.
See ya.